We go to the losing locker room after a game like last night. Of course, the Eagles favored 2.5, go down to Tampa Bay. The Buccaneers beat them up 32-9. So the conversation coming out of the game is what's going to happen, the future of the Eagles. Jason Kelce has called it a career, the Hall of Famer there at center. So some changes on the horizon for the Philadelphia Eagles. To discuss, Scott Grayson joins, Fox 29 Philly sports anchor, ESPN Radio 97.3 Eagles Beat. Host Props and Locks Fridays at 6:30 p.m. on Fox 29. And Scott, first off, thank you for the time. The conversation today in Philly, I'm guessing it's tense. Give us an idea of the conversation there in Philadelphia today.
It is all about the figuring out, number one, what exactly happened over the last 2 months, and number two, what do you do about it? And I think that's where right now, the front office is sitting trying to decide that. And I think then you ask yourself, okay, well, how do you figure that out? I think it's got to start with conversations with some of the key veterans on this team, and I expect Jeffrey Lurie has either already, the owner has either already had those conversations or is going to work on having them, and then today or tomorrow, to try to figure out what he does here. And I think it's such a complicated issue because you look at what Nick Sirianni has done here, and I think at the very least, they're going to have to replace. I think they've got to replace all the coordinators, and you got to kind of scrap that if you decide that Nick Sirianni can turn this around. If not, you're obviously going to be scrapping them anyway. So there's a lot here to unpack for the front office, and they've got a big task ahead of them. I mean, there's a lot of contracts that are up, a lot of players to figure out, but you've got to first figure out who's going to be steering the ship, and that's what these guys really have to figure out first and foremost. And I think those are the questions that they're going to be asking Nick Sirianni. What happened, and how do you propose you fix it from here going into next year if he's still the coach?
Scott, two-part question. You went to high school in Downington. You're an Eagles fan. As a fan, what would you do? And what do you believe the team will end up doing with Nick Sirianni? Because Howie Roseman's been there 23 years. He's got a lot of cachet with Jeffrey Lurie.
He does, and he's even gone through spending a little time in the doghouse back when Chip Kelly got control of things. I think fans around here, and what would I do as a fan? To me, I don't see how you go 10-1, lose 6 of your last 7 games, and don't even get to 12 total wins, and have an answer that is responsible enough to be able to still steer this thing into next year. Maybe he will. To me, I just don't see, and like I said, it's a complicated issue, partly because you look at all of the great coaches that are really out there that you could try to sway and come in here. And you have a key asset here, and that is, what's believed to be a franchise quarterback. And I still think he is. I think a lot of the regressions that Jalen Hurts had this year were due to the coaches and the schemes and the situations they put him into that were not favorable for success. So I think, in my opinion, I think you seriously have to kick the tires on moving on. And that's tough because this guy had you to the playoffs all 3 years he's been here. His record is outstanding, even with the slide at the end of this year. And he took you to the Super Bowl last year. But I think, if I were able to, and if it were me, I would want to hear that answer to that question I posed before. What happened and how do you plan on fixing it? Because I think if that's not a very strong, convincing answer, you have to move on.
Scott Grayson on the Eagles Beat joins us here, Sharp Money, presented by DraftKings. Let me ask you this. We just heard from Lane Johnson, Scott. He was asked 3 different ways about Sirianni and refused to co-sign for him, so refused to back the coach. It was very tactical on Johnson's part. Take us inside the locker room and the relationship between Sirianni and the players.
Yeah, it was, last year winning is great, right? And that locker room dynamic with Nick was fun. It was great. The chemistry was just high as could be. There was a great relationship between Sirianni and the players, and especially the key veterans, and that was constantly mentioned and talked about. Somewhere along the line this year, and I don't even know really where it happened, but, as you were talking to players more and more, and they are artful with their words. Lane Johnson's great. They understand how to say things without really saying it. And I think we started to hear and hear little keywords and nuggets about things that, that there just wasn't the faith in the coaches. And the question was, and that we never really understood was, is it the coordinators or is it even higher than that they were perhaps questioning. I think these players, to a man, would tell you if they were not on record that they didn't feel like they were being put in positions to succeed. So I think as we're hearing more and more from these players, now that the season is over and you're not trying to protect anything more for this year, you're getting a little more truth from them. I think what you're hearing is that there is that disconnect right now. And that's, again, something that I think, has to be answered if Nick Sirianni is going to keep his job. How do you reconnect with this locker room? How do you rebuild that chemistry? Because right now I think there's a lot of doubt from players to coaches as far as how they were putting them into positions to succeed and frankly, not. Now, there were a lot of missed tackles last night. That's not on coaches. Yeah. That's clearly not on coaches. But there is some things that need to be fixed behind the scenes for sure.
Scott,
but the effort, I'm sorry, Amal, just quickly, the effort, Scott, just wasn't there. Like, that was almost, forget scheme. I looked to the head coach because he's got players out there that just weren't giving max effort in a playoff game.
No, you're absolutely right. And who was, right? For the most part, it became in the second half a Fletcher Cox, a Brandon Graham, guys who know that their window is closing, if not shut, here in Philly now. And that is – so you saw the guys in the effort coming from the guys who were realizing, where things are, the reality of their situation. Younger players, the energy level just wasn't there. I mean, Devontae Smith certainly outperformed what was expected of a young player for sure, especially when you think he's going to get double covered a lot with A.J. Brown out. But there were a lot of the energy, and frankly, that was a common theme over this last 6 to 7 weeks. It just didn't seem like they were fired up coming out of the locker room, that they were really had all that energy. And that was a trademark and a staple of this team last year. They came out and they got you right away, and they came after you. And included one of the things I had a question about was why, if you won the coin toss, were you deferring last night? Why did you put your defense, which has been so awful, out on the field first, instead of trying to even go down and get 3 points yourself to start the game? There's a lot of things here that frankly kind of fell apart. You're right about the energy level, the effort for sure. There was a lot of, I don't think I want to make that tackle. Maybe were there business decisions being made a little bit in that game once it started to get late in the second half. There's a lot of things that need to be fixed here, like I said, and that's Howie Roseman's job.
Scott, you mentioned the defensive side of the ball, the lack of effort. When they made the change from Sean Desai to Matt Patricia, how was it received, not just on the defensive side of the ball, but as an organization as a whole?
I think it was perceived initially as an attention-getting, like, okay, all right, let's see how this goes. Now with hindsight, it was an awful decision. And I don't think it's all Matt Patricia's fault. You tried to get him to run a defense and call a defense that isn't exactly the kind of defense he prefers, or would have built himself. And it's just looking back in hindsight, I don't know that I would ever make that move again, because you don't have the benefit of training camp to build up your playbook, go over schemes and things that you really want. There was so much miscommunication. Several times, several games, motion was done, and you see these guys looking at each other and move together, and it's like, well, no, wait, one of you guys needs to stay over here. And I think that's part of where it came from on the defensive side, talking to players, where there was that, the hints that there was that disconnect with the coaching staff, or not necessarily believing they were in the right place at the right time. Why is Hassan Reddick dropping back in coverage so much at the end of the year? That guy is built for going after the quarterback. I think there's a lot of questions to ask there. So initially, I think it was a message sending kind of move that I think got some attention in the locker room. But then as it just continued to go, I think it just started to become even more and more of a failed experiment. I don't think you put all the blame on Patricia. I think it goes around for sure. But that's another question. Whose decision was that? Was that Nick Sirianni's decision, right, or was that made above him? And that's where accountability is going to have to start to be taken.
Yeah, because they're a progressive, they're a different type of organization, as you mentioned off the top. Well, listen, Scott, it's going to be a busy couple of days covering not just the Eagles, but Philly sports heads. So we appreciate the time. Fox 29, ESPN Radio, also Props and Locks, Friday, 6:30 p.m. on Fox 29. Scott Grayson. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.